Mushroom clouds are rising over Allied skies in the Middle East, while the most powerful military force on Earth sits completely paralyzed by its own deeply flawed and impulsive decisions. Retaliatory strikes are obliterating vital infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and Qatar at this very moment, representing a direct and devastating consequence of a reckless, utterly uncalculated attack on Iranian energy facilities. The entire world is watching in absolute shock as the current administration scrambles in pure panic, desperately trying to shift the heavy burden of blame onto Israel while the surrounding region burns out of control. Beijing is actively taking detailed notes, quietly watching the United States willingly drain its crucial military presence from Asia merely to fight a catastrophic war on the other side of the planet. Global rivals are openly laughing as the supposed master negotiator gets entirely outmaneuvered and effectively checkmated on the international chessboard. Sovereign nations that once relied entirely on the United States for absolute security have suddenly become prime targets. Their skies are turning dark because of a chaotic, unpredictable foreign policy that blindly strikes first and pathetically begs for forgiveness later. The geopolitical dominoes are falling incredibly fast, and the severe economic consequences are already marching straight toward your community, threatening to completely upend the global energy market and shatter whatever fragile peace still remains. Welcome to United States News Daily. Today, we are breaking down exactly how this historic failure in leadership is actively unfolding and what it truly means for your daily life. If you find value in staying ahead of the mainstream narrative and uncovering the absolute truth behind these major headlines, consider subscribing to the channel and ringing the notification bell so you never miss a critical update on this rapidly developing global crisis. Citizens across the Pacific Ocean are currently facing a terrifying new reality. Retail gas stations in Tokyo are hanging handmade cardboard signs apologizing to their loyal customers. The message is simple but devastating. They are completely out of gasoline. The root cause is directly tied to the disastrous foreign policy decisions emanating from the highest levels of the United States government. The Japanese Prime Minister is scrambling to implement emergency subsidies just to keep the retail price of fuel from completely crushing the working class. They are artificially capping the price at 170 yen per litre on the national average. This is a desperate, unsustainable measure applied to a gaping economic wound. The third largest economy in the world is essentially subsidizing its citizens' daily commute because the global supply chain has been severely fractured by impulsive military strikes in the Middle East. The panic is absolutely not contained to the Japanese archipelago. It is highly contagious and moving rapidly. The situation in Thailand reveals an even darker progression. The Thai government has officially banned most oil exports. They are actively imposing strict price controls, fully aware that their domestic reserves are dangerously exposed. Authorities are now urgently advising corporations to mandate remote work for their employees and drastically reduce all non-essential travel. This creeping, invisible crisis originating in Asia is characterized by sudden lockdowns, restricted movement, and plunging supply lines. It mirrors the very early days of a massive global pandemic, but this is an entirely manufactured disaster. It is an economic virus born from failed diplomacy and reckless aggression. Entire nations are grinding to a halt, hoarding whatever fossil fuels they can secure, bracing for a prolonged winter of severe scarcity. The sheer arrogance in Washington assumes this immense supply shock will magically stop at the border. That assumption is fatally flawed. The Pacific Ocean is not a shield against global commodities markets. The absolute scarcity sweeping through Asian markets is the canary in the coal mine for the American consumer. We are witnessing the largest sudden rise in energy costs in modern history. The price per barrel of oil has violently shattered the ceiling of $110, and it shows absolutely zero signs of stabilizing. When Southeast Asia halts exports and taps into strategic stockpiles just to survive the week, the entire global equation breaks down. There is a finite amount of crude flowing through the veins of international commerce. When one hemisphere hoards, the other hemisphere inevitably starves. Very soon, the heartbreaking scenes unfolding at Japanese fueling stations will become a grim reality in your own neighborhood. We are not just talking about exorbitant prices that force families to choose between groceries and a full tank. We are talking about absolute physical shortages. The pumps will simply run dry. The concept of unaffordable gasoline is terrible, but the reality of non-existent gasoline will completely paralyze the nation. Logistics networks rely entirely on diesel. Food delivery relies heavily on fuel. The moment the trucking industry hesitates because operating costs exceed profit margins, grocery store shelves will begin to empty. The administration has backed the nation into a corner where working-class citizens will bear the ultimate financial burden of a war they never asked for and a strategy that was never properly planned. The psychology of the market is reacting violently to this incompetence. When commodities traders look at the Strait of Hormuz, they do not see political posturing, they see immediate supply strangulation. Insurance premiums for maritime shipping are skyrocketing out of control. Massive oil tankers are actively rerouting, adding weeks to their journeys and multiplying transportation costs exponentially. Every single extra day a cargo ship spends avoiding a newly created conflict zone adds a massive premium to the final product delivered to your doorstep. This is the hidden tax of a monumental political failure. It is a slow-moving economic avalanche. By the time the average citizen realizes the sheer magnitude of the supply chain disruption, it will be far too late to prepare. Corporate media outlets might attempt to frame this catastrophic failure as a temporary blip, a passing cloud over the economic landscape. But the bare shelves and the out-of-order signs at local fueling stations will tell the undeniable truth. This economic devastation is the direct penalty levied on the public for weak, indecisive leadership on the global stage. The people making these disastrous calls will never feel the pinch at the pump. They will never stare at a zero balance in their bank accounts after filling their vehicles to get to a minimum wage job. The American standard of living is being actively eroded and deliberately sacrificed to cover up a severely flawed global strategy. The global chessboard is undergoing a rapid and unprecedented transformation. While attention remains heavily anchored in the deserts of the Middle East, power dynamics in entirely different hemispheres are shifting profoundly. Strategists in Beijing are not merely passive observers to the current military deployments. They are actively analyzing every single strategic pivot, calculating the exact limitations of an overextended military apparatus. The deliberate transfer of naval assets and combat personnel away from the Pacific theater creates a noticeable vacuum. In the complex world of international relations, vacuums are never left empty for long. The leadership in China views this profound distraction as a rare, golden opportunity to solidify their regional dominance without facing the immediate, overwhelming friction of a fully focused adversary. They are mapping the logistical vulnerabilities and observing the political fatigue, recognizing that a superpower stretched across multiple conflict zones simultaneously cannot maintain absolute superiority in all of them. Their focus remains fiercely locked on territorial ambitions, particularly regarding the island nation lying just across the strait, knowing that an occupied opponent is a weakened opponent. Simultaneously, the geopolitical maneuvering extends far beyond the Asian continent. The relationship between the Western powers and their traditional adversaries is being severely tested by unforeseen alliances and bold incursions. The situation involving the Russian Federation demonstrates a calculated defiance of established economic pressure. Despite heavy international embargoes and severe diplomatic isolation intended to cripple their energy sector, Russian crude oil and liquefied natural gas continue to find willing buyers on the global market. The revenue generated from these subterranean resources provides the necessary capital to sustain their strategic objectives and project military power far beyond their immediate borders. The failure to completely choke off this economic lifeline has granted them a dangerous level of operational freedom. This projection of power recently materialized in the Western Hemisphere in a manner that strongly echoes the darkest days of the 20th century. Russian naval vessels, including advanced submarines and heavily armed frigates, have charted a course directly into the warm waters of the Caribbean Sea. Their destination is a mere 90 miles from the southern coastline of the North American continent. The arrival of these warships in Havana Harbor is not a simple diplomatic visit. It is a highly visible, deeply symbolic demonstration of reach and resilience. It sends a clear message that while primary forces are entangled in complex, asymmetrical warfare in distant deserts, rival nations possess the capability and the willingness to park strategic assets directly on the immediate doorstep. They are providing critical energy lifelines to an impoverished island nation, completely bypassing the long-standing blockades and openly mocking the concept of hemispheric dominance. The historical parallels are impossible to ignore. Decades ago, the presence of foreign military assets in that exact location brought the entire world to the absolute brink of nuclear annihilation. Today, the deployment serves a different but equally deliberate purpose. It highlights a perceived vulnerability and challenges the fundamental concept of deterrence. When a nation actively projects military strength into a heavily contested region like the Persian Gulf, it fully expects its rivals to retreat out of caution. Instead, the current dynamic reveals adversaries who are emboldened, stepping confidently into the gaps left unguarded and openly challenging the traditional spheres of influence. They see a leadership structure that hesitates, that issues warnings but fails to follow through with decisive action when those warnings are blatantly ignored. This multiple front pressure creates an agonizing dilemma for military planners and policymakers. Every single resource deployed to deter immediate threats in one region inherently weakens the defensive posture in another. The simultaneous challenges from two formidable nuclear powers require a level of diplomatic finesse and strategic clarity that currently appears dangerously absent. The rival nations are not necessarily coordinating their actions through a formal signed alliance, but they are absolutely capitalizing on the exact same fundamental weakness. They recognize that an adversary preoccupied with endless tactical emergencies loses the vital capacity for long-term strategic planning. They are effectively executing a geopolitical checkmate, forcing their opponent to react to multiple, simultaneous threats until the defensive lines simply buckle under the immense pressure. Furthermore, the economic dimension of these maneuvers heavily exacerbates the domestic strain. As working citizens face escalating costs for basic necessities and energy, they watch foreign governments seemingly bypass international restrictions with absolute ease. The stark contrast between domestic economic anxiety and the brazen projection of foreign power creates a deep, corrosive sense of vulnerability among the populace. It shatters the fundamental assumption of unassailable national security. People are beginning to realize that the immense wealth and military might of their nation are being stretched incredibly thin on foreign misadventures, while actual adversaries grow stronger and closer. The global stage is no longer defined by unipolar dominance. It is rapidly fracturing into a highly competitive, multipolar arena where traditional deterrence mechanisms are failing spectacularly. The adversaries are not merely reacting to global events, they are actively shaping the environment, probing defensive perimeters, and expertly exploiting political divisions. They are playing a long, meticulously calculated game of global attrition, waiting patiently as the predominant superpower exhausts its vital resources, its economic strength, and its political capital in seemingly endless unwinnable engagements overseas. This is not a sudden, unpredictable crisis, but rather a slow, methodical dismantling of a long-established global order, orchestrated by patient rivals who understand exactly how to leverage a profound distraction into a permanent, unassailable strategic advantage. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the bedrock of Western alliances is openly crumbling in real time. European leaders are no longer hiding their absolute disdain for the unilateral chaos erupting from Washington. The Chancellor of Germany stepped directly in front of the international press and delivered a stunning rebuke, explicitly stating that his government was never consulted regarding the catastrophic military actions taken in the Middle East. He noted with chilling clarity that American leadership explicitly rejected European assistance, essentially telling their oldest allies to stay away. The German leadership made it perfectly known that they would have strongly advised against this deeply destructive path. Simultaneously, the Prime Minister of Spain hosted the Ukrainian leadership and delivered a profound message of solidarity that doubled as a sharp condemnation of American unreliability. He promised that while others walk away from their commitments and betray their friends, Europe will not turn a blind eye or allow sudden regional conflicts to distract from the ongoing defense of sovereign nations. These are not mere diplomatic disagreements spoken in private. They are unprecedented public declarations of no confidence from the nations that once formed the core of the Western coalition. However, the most damning indictment of this administration does not come from the European continent, but from the very heart of the Arabian Peninsula. The Foreign Minister of Oman recently shattered the diplomatic silence by publishing a deeply unsettling piece in a major global publication. Oman has historically served as the quiet, reliable mediator bridging the massive divide between Western powers and the Islamic Republic. Their diplomats understand the delicate architecture of regional peace better than anyone alive. According to the minister, a historic breakthrough was actively unfolding behind closed doors just weeks prior. The United Kingdom sent its highest-ranking national security advisor to assist. The Omani officials meticulously laid the groundwork. Everyone in that highly secure room firmly believed they had finally reached a solid agreement in principle. This was not a minor tactical pause or a temporary ceasefire. This was a comprehensive framework where the Iranian leadership was practically ready to agree to halt all future enrichment capabilities required to construct a nuclear weapon. Strong, undeniable verification protocols were firmly on the table. The world was mere inches away from securing a massive diplomatic victory that would have fundamentally stabilized the entire region and guaranteed global security for generations to come. Yet, the representation sent by the United States turned this monumental historical moment into an absolute tragic farce. While seasoned diplomats from the United Kingdom and Oman carefully negotiated the incredibly tense details of nuclear containment, the political appointees representing the American administration were completely detached from reality. Eyewitness accounts reveal an astonishing level of incompetence that borders on the surreal. Instead of focusing on preventing a global war, these proxies were reportedly joking around, lifting their feet, and showing off their expensive custom footwear to the bewildered Iranian delegation. They were openly bragging about how their commander-in-chief arbitrarily guesses the shoe sizes of his staff and forces them to wear these specific brands, regardless of whether they actually fit. In the most critical security negotiation of the decade, the American envoys were discussing leather goods while their international counterparts tried desperately to save the world from total annihilation. Despite this breathtaking amateurism, the professional mediators still managed to secure the framework of a functional peace deal. The hard work was essentially finished. The world was seemingly safe. Then, the sun went down. That exact same night, in a split second, completely discarding months of grueling international diplomacy, the American leadership casually agreed to launch the strikes. The pivot was instantaneous, reckless, and totally uncalculated. The Omani foreign minister laid out the terrifying consequences of this betrayal with brutal honesty. He described the retaliatory strikes hitting neighboring Arab territories as an inevitable, deeply regrettable, and completely unacceptable result of cornering a regime and threatening its total termination. When an administration publicly announces a campaign designed to completely decapitate a leadership structure, it leaves that regime with absolutely no rational option but to lash out violently for its own survival. The deepest tragedy falls upon the Gulf states themselves. These nations placed their absolute trust and their entire sovereign security in the hands of American cooperation. Now, they experience that exact same cooperation as an acute, existential vulnerability threatening their very existence. These rapidly developing Arab nations spent the last decade meticulously constructing a brand new economic model. They invested countless billions into transforming their desert landscapes into global hubs for elite sports, luxury tourism, massive aviation networks, and cutting-edge technology. They were actively building the massive global data centers of the future. All of those ambitious plans are now heavily endangered, literally going up in smoke. The reckless actions of one unhinged administration have effectively transformed these prosperous, forward-looking nations into personal gambling tables, treating sovereign wealth and millions of innocent lives like disposable chips in a bankrupt casino. The final, most haunting question posed by the Omani official addresses the permanent damage done to the concept of international trust. He pointed out that resolving this massive crisis will inevitably require a return to the negotiating table, because military force alone cannot ever enforce permanent stability. But he asked the world a simple, unanswerable question. How can any sovereign nation ever return to a dialogue with an administration that has repeatedly and abruptly switched from peaceful talks to sudden bombings and targeted assassinations? If an adversary knows that participating in a peace summit is merely a trap designed to map out targets for a drone strike the very next morning, the basic foundation of diplomacy is permanently dead. The diplomats who dedicated their entire careers to building these vital international bridges are watching helplessly as political tourists armed with absolute authority burn those exact same bridges to the ground for short-term political theater. This catastrophic failure of basic statecraft sends a chilling message to every single non-aligned nation currently observing the carnage. The world is witnessing the real-time collapse of an empire not through conquest from outside forces, but through sheer, unfiltered incompetence and breathtaking arrogance from within the very rooms where peace was supposed to be forged. The massive logistical machinery of the United States military is currently executing a terrifying pivot. Thousands of combat-ready troops, originally stationed to protect vital interests in the Pacific theater, are being rapidly redeployed. Marine expeditionary units are pulling up their deep anchors in Japan, leaving behind a highly vulnerable Asian coastline, to sail directly into the most volatile combat zone on the planet. This is not a routine rotation of forces or a standard training exercise. This massive mobilization is happening because the highest levels of civilian leadership are actively contemplating the unthinkable. They are openly discussing a full-scale ground invasion of the Iranian mainland. Invading a mountainous, heavily fortified nation of that size is a logistical nightmare that defies basic military logic. Yet, the rhetoric emanating from Washington suggests an administration completely detached from the brutal realities of modern warfare. They are casually tossing around the idea of a massive, boots-on-the-ground campaign, seemingly oblivious to the horrific historical echoes of a Vietnam-style quagmire. The sheer hubris required to believe a foreign occupying force can easily pacify a hostile nation with that specific geography is absolutely staggering. Military strategists universally recognize that the topography of the Iranian plateau is a fortress designed by nature to destroy invading armies. It is completely ringed by massive mountain ranges that funnel advancing columns into deadly choke points. Attempting to secure not just the narrow Strait of Hormuz, but the vast, unforgiving coastline and the rugged interior, requires a commitment of blood and treasure that would shatter the American working class. We are talking about committing hundreds of thousands of sons and daughters to an unwinnable war of attrition, fighting block by block, valley by valley, against an enemy that has spent 4 decades preparing for this exact scenario. The arrogance of assuming a swift victory in such a hostile environment reveals a profound ignorance of military history. The architects of this escalating disaster are political commentators and reality television personalities, individuals who have never personally experienced the crushing weight of combat. They dodged the draft in their youth and now eagerly send a new generation into a meat grinder, mistaking their own loud bravado for actual strategic brilliance. This terrifying lack of foresight is perfectly encapsulated in the recent, highly publicized targeted assassinations. 2 days ago, a drone strike eliminated Ali Larijani, a prominent national security advisor within the Islamic Republic. The immediate reaction from the administration and its allies was triumphant celebration. They cheered the elimination of a known adversary, proudly parading the strike as a massive tactical victory. However, this shallow celebration completely ignores the intricate, deeply entrenched power dynamics of the regime they are fighting. Larijani was undoubtedly a hostile actor, but within the complex spectrum of their leadership, he represented a faction that occasionally understood the pragmatic necessity of negotiation. He was a known entity, someone diplomats could occasionally engage with when the world hovered on the brink of total disaster. By eliminating the pragmatic adversary, the administration did not solve the problem. They merely accelerated a far more terrifying succession plan. The power structure in Tehran does not collapse when a single leader falls. It operates like a deeply entrenched bureaucracy of zealots. For every single high-ranking official, there are 3 to 7 individuals waiting in the shadows, completely prepared to instantly fill the sudden vacancy. And the fundamental rule of this succession is terrifyingly simple. The replacement is always significantly more radical than the predecessor. By cheering the death of Larijani, the current administration has essentially rolled out the red carpet for figures like Saeed Jalili. If Larijani was a difficult adversary, Jalili is a fundamentalist true believer who views compromise as a mortal sin. He is widely considered to be 10 times more extreme, a man entirely unwilling to entertain the concept of diplomatic de-escalation. The exact same terrifying dynamic applies to the absolute highest levels of their supreme leadership. If a targeted strike were to suddenly remove the current Ayatollah, the system is designed to immediately elevate his son, a figure known for possessing an even more brutal and uncompromising vision for the region. This is the ultimate paradox of conducting foreign policy through sudden assassinations without a coherent long-term strategy. You eliminate the very individuals you might one day desperately need to negotiate a ceasefire. The United States is actively pruning the branches of this hostile regime, only to watch it grow back thicker, harder, and vastly more dangerous. The decision-makers in Washington are playing a deadly game of checkers while their adversaries are playing multi-generational chess. They view a fiery explosion on a drone camera as a definitive victory, completely failing to calculate the massive political fallout that occurs the morning after. They are systematically destroying every single diplomatic off-ramp, pushing the opposing leadership into a corner where violent, uncompromising retaliation becomes their only politically viable option. Ultimately, this catastrophic misunderstanding of regional power dynamics does not just endanger the soldiers deployed to the front lines. It directly threatens the absolute security and economic stability of every single citizen back home. The administration is repeatedly poking a hornet nest with a stick, completely surprised when the entire swarm attacks the global economy. They are trading the long-term stability of the global energy market and the safety of allied nations for cheap, momentary political points meant to distract a domestic audience. The sheer incompetence of trading a difficult negotiator for a religious zealot, while simultaneously draining Pacific defenses to prepare for an impossible desert invasion, represents the absolute collapse of American strategic thinking. It is a masterclass in how to simultaneously lose a Cold War in Asia while starting a hot war in the Middle East, all orchestrated by an administration that fundamentally does not understand the very world it is trying to violently reshape. The entire globe is currently witnessing a masterclass in absolute geopolitical failure. The current administration has successfully isolated our oldest allies, emboldened historic adversaries, and pushed the domestic economy toward a catastrophic cliff. As working families prepare to face unprecedented costs for basic survival, the political elite continue to play a reckless game of global dominance with absolutely zero comprehension of the devastating consequences. Mainstream corporate media networks will inevitably attempt to sanitize this disaster. They will desperately spin these monumental diplomatic collapses as necessary strategic maneuvers. But the stark reality of empty fuel pumps and crumbling international treaties cannot be hidden behind slick televised press conferences. No one is coming to save the working class from this completely manufactured crisis. You must aggressively seek the truth and piece together the unvarnished reality for yourself. This platform exists specifically to cut through that exact layer of political deception. We dedicate our resources to bringing you the unfiltered reality of these massive global shifts before they completely upend your daily life. If you found this detailed breakdown valuable, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Share this specific broadcast across your social media feeds. Send it directly to your friends and your family members who are actively wondering why their cost of living is suddenly exploding. We desperately need your help to break through the corporate echo chambers and alert the public to what is actually happening on the world stage. Finally, drop your own thoughts and personal observations down in the comment section below. We want to know exactly how these foreign policy failures are impacting your community. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and thank you for watching.